So today we're talking with Andrew Wang, a serial entrepreneur who's been in all kinds of business from startup to a big FANG company like Amazon. Hey, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today and being with us. Maybe just to start us off, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and like how you got to where you're at today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Going back to where kind of how I got here. That's a kind of, I
Loaded
would say, an
question, sorry.
untraditional journey. So coming out of high school, I actually wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My parents own a restaurant, an immigrant family, and I was thinking, what should I do? I actually ended up going to LA to stay with my grandparents for a while in Los Angeles. I started by learning to code. Actually did take a coding boot camp during that time. It was eye opening, but it kind of lacked the depth that I wanted.
I see.
So I kind of wanted to get more depths. I think my first instinct was to like kind of hop into entrepreneurship. So I went to Honolulu actually, because there were a couple of friends that I had met in LA, and we actually ended up starting a web development studio, and we had
Nice.
some success there. We had some clients like Hawaii Behavioral Health, some larger, like there's an international university, Hawaii Tokai International University. That was, a really invaluable time, but still, I think I was looking for more of a deep knowledge and expertise. I ended up applying to a couple programs. I did end up going to Harvard for computer science. And I think the most invaluable thing there was actually the resources. So I got a lot of resources there. I actually ended up starting a company there with an MBA friend of mine.
Oh,
We
nice.
were incubated at Harvard Innovation Labs, right? Harvard Innovation Labs, yeah, in their venture incubation program, which was amazing. Kind of got my appetite going even more for entrepreneurship. We, ended up leaving school for that. I realized that I was very green still, and there were a lot of shortcomings there. I was a student trying to lead a team of developers and
Mm,
make business decisions, and we did well. But yeah, there was a lot that I could have done better. So I kind of wanted to see how things were at scale. Went and applied to positions. Is kind of the timing around when COVID was just about to hit. Quarantine was about to hit, so I wanted to stay near my parents. So I went and ADT had just acquired a startup for their DIY division, and they were going to start incorporating Google's Nest products in. So I joined ADT, was there for about almost 3 years, and then also started getting that itch around that 3 year mark of like, I want to see more scale, I want to see more growth. I feel like I haven't learned everything that I could learn, and then that's kind of how I ended up at Amazon. And then at Amazon, I was there for 3 years, mostly in the physical stores, or kind of at a really exciting time too, where we were working on like Amazon Go, Amazon Fresh, like just walk out technology.
oh,
Um,
that's cool.
yeah, so we did a lot of APIs that dealt with a lot of the customer metadata, data pipelines. That's what my team worked on. After that, I think again after 3 years, I was looking for something more like agile. I think Amazon, I became really good at playing the political game and like dealing with like getting things across the line quickly. And it's not just pure code execution. And then that's how I ended up being like, oh, I kind of want to work for a startup again. I miss that fast paced environment. So I'm now at Vermont Commerce. It's a Series B startup,
Nice.
and get to work with a lot of like AI. Like we get to integrate a lot of AI in our products, to work directly with customers, hear what customers need, solve problems on a very short timeline without much red tape. And it's been great. And they're for about July, so almost 6 months now.
6 months.
Yeah.
Um, it's an interesting journey. I feel you on that. Like I kind of did the same thing. I didn't go to school right away. Like I was self-taught kind of deal, and then got in from the website and then learned. I'm interested because it's something I never did. What being, I guess, like having already been in industry a little bit, like starting the company, having like experience there, was it just like a hey, I know that there are things that I don't know, and that's why I want to like continue to like pursue education, like that's why you went into Harvard? Or was it like, hey, there are just like other parts of engineering that I want to like explore. You know what I mean? Like that you didn't have access to, I guess, like in doing like the web stuff maybe in Hawaii. Like I'm kind of curious what drove you back to going back to school, because like normally most people in industry would just continue to work. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like so,
Yeah.
like I like that you went back for the education, and I'm curious, like, because you obviously that was obviously really good for you. Like, it took you on a good journey, right? So,
Yeah. I think the impression, my thought process going into it was definitely misled. I think going into it, I thought that there was there was a large amount of things that I couldn't learn, like in terms of like CS theory, kind of what's on the cutting edge. And I think that really is what originally drove me to go back to school. And to be honest, I did always enjoy learning. Like it's something that I enjoy is being in
nice.
school. Like academia is something that I really enjoy. And I think what ended up happening is that the resources that school provided was what propelled me further into the field. It was the ability to just get a startup going, and like Harvard having the resources to provide the Harvard Innovation Lab, which allows us to be incubated there. And we had mentorship. We had other startup founders around us that were doing really well. We had access to investors, legal counsel. Like it just, these are resources, and the network that's available to you is what became invaluable to me, and what in hindsight is what was the true value of going there instead of just the classes themselves.
Do you think the lessons that you took out of Harvard, like the more valuable ones, were related to like your technical field, or more just around like the business? You know what I mean? Like the
Mhm.
other half of it, essentially, right?
Yeah, I would say definitely the other half. And that didn't really become fully valuable until I became more senior. So I think going into industry, I grew the most rapidly in my technical execution. And then
Mm-hmm.
later on in my career, I was able to kind of pull back from my startup founder experience. And I became, if I did like self describe, I think the superpower for me, the strength that I have is probably like gaining trust, fostering trust, and like making sure that I can manage up and down to get things across the line. And that's not always just pure code execution, and particularly at a large
Exactly.
organization.
Yeah, and like relationship building and stuff
Yeah,
like that, right?
those became super important um, instead of just execution.
I'm kind of curious because like you kind of had experience before you went back to school, and then like it's an interesting weave of of stuff, right? It's not necessarily just linear growth. So I'm kind of curious how, seeing that you were just in school, I mean, like now it's like 2026, so this is like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, right?
Yeah,
But
it's
like
good time now.
yeah, but like oh man, I'm old too. No, it, I'm curious between like when your experience in school, and then like what you're seeing out of maybe like college grads that you're seeing now in industry come out and stuff like that. How have you have you gotten any insight into like how learning has changed? Like, you know what I mean? Like how they're
Mhm.
learning to dev, or the kind of skills that you'd expect out of a new college grad coming out versus like now versus like maybe like 5 years ago or something. It's like we just put them through like normal like leak code kind of interviews, and then they can answer them and we're good to go. I'm curious, like, do you expect different skill sets now? Is it more, like, is that I've been a little bit out of the hiring game for like
Mhm.
new engine stuff, so I'm curious to like, since you've been in startup and stuff like that and around that.
Yeah, we're in a funny time. The timing of this conversation is also really interesting because I feel like we're in a very pivotal moment where a lot of interviewing processes are up in the air now. People are experimenting, even from out right now. Like I think we are looking at different ways to interview. Companies are bringing in-person interviews back, due to the prevalence of AI, or just being able sometimes just valuing in-person connection a little more than they were before. I think during the quarantine, when things were more online, it was very heavily dependent on just leak code. It felt like very leak code heavy for entry level. And if you could pass this bar of execution, you would most likely pass. I think if you were not, past the behavioral. And some companies, it's just cultural. Behavioral is much more important.
Right.
Amazon, the leadership principles are extremely important to getting hired. I think it used to depend on the company. I think now it's just even more. I think companies are going more experimental to try to figure out how can we hire the right people in
Yeah.
an environment where development is often seen as you need to augment that with AI now.
It's interesting that you say it. Like I noticed that where like so I was at LinkedIn for a while, and then I got laid off in 2023. And coming out like in just 2023, this is just like only like 3 years ago, 2 years ago, it was still very much like every FANG company, it felt like, hey, just go study leak code for like 4 weeks and then you'll be fine. You know what I mean? Just go do the interview and you'll be fine. And in some cases, I think there's still a few companies that are still doing that now. But a lot more companies, and I've noticed that's a lot of startups are doing it, are experimenting, where it's like the last startup that I interviewed with, there was zero technical. There was zero technical in the sense of me coding, like on a like a shared coding, like code share or something like that, and then them running my code. It was a lot more like, how do you think? How do you solve problems? And a little bit of like, hey, do you use AI in your day to day? Like, how do you use it? Um, and at first, I I was just like, yay, like, hey, the interviews just got easier, right? Like, it's a lot easier to have talking interviews than to have a whiteboarding or like I need to code this solution and have them compile it at the end of 45 minutes kind of conversation. But it's now I see the value in terms of like, we're getting back to like, how do you think? Critical thinking is becoming important. A lot of those soft skills, like types of things, are becoming important. Um, and I think there is going to be, I guess, like, do you guys rather than me trying to lead the conversation, because I don't want to just talk here, do you guys encourage like on the day to day at in your current day to day, how do you use AI, and like how do you encourage the usage and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act because if you become too reliant on it, as it's sometimes easy to do, you lose touch with what the code actually does. I think the best process that's been efficient for me is breaking it up into chunks of work that are well defined. And then essentially what you're doing is essentially doing code reviews for a junior engineer is
Yeah.
essentially what's happening. Is like, oh, let's review all the code that's been changed, all the diffs, and does that make sense? Is there a much better way of doing it? And then, sometimes it's a quick change and you just implement the change very quickly. And sometimes it's like, I think we need a little refactor here to keep this in mind, and that'll be really fast.
You made a good point about that, like becoming too reliant on it. You know what I mean? Like, because it is very easy, especially with Claude and stuff like that. And it's actually a lot of fun, right? To plan and then see it execute and like see it generate. That is, it makes sense. Like, and I align 100% with the workflow. And as like somebody with experience and like understanding of your craft, it makes sense that you can work that way. How do you have any reservations about your workflow if, like, say you were trying to apply it to somebody with less experience in industry? Or are there cautionary things that you know what I mean, like some caveats, some asterisks you would use there, out of curiosity?
I think the only thing I would say is that it's still important to have a person do it when you're writing a PR that gets put out. It's still, I think, important to have a person who knows the architecture and the structure and the actual way the data flows to take a look at it,
Mm-hmm.
because there are certain things that just don't get caught when you're not as sure. And I mean, I think this applies broadly. This applied broadly even before AI was prevalent, is that I think it's important to ask a lot of questions. PRs are a great place to have those discussions.
Hmm.
And I think that those discussions need to still happen. I don't think AI should supplant and kind of replace those conversations that happen with real engineers on your team with
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, I think it's like that idea that but like having the tools that generate the code doesn't mean that you need less context, right? In essence, it would be like you need more context. So I guess like that's I'm interested to know how, or to see how, like, because I have my ideas of how I feel like dev is going to change for like junior devs and the positions and how you see them and stuff. And I'm kind of curious, like, as we get closer to like where the day to day is, like we're basically just like software architecting at this point and like orchestrating like teams and stuff like that. What does a junior, like what do you think a junior entry level dev position looks like now? And like what kind of skills would you say, like, hey, focus on these, like, you know what I mean, like in the next
Mm-hmm.
5 years, like if you were entering school now, focus on these skills because that's
Mm-hmm.
really what's going to be important when you hit the industry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I wish I had the 8 ball, but I think some of those core skills that don't change no matter what the industry is, I think or I should phrase it, the most successful engineers that come in, and whether it's a junior engineer or even a more experienced engineer that's coming into a completely new stack, I think being able to quickly comprehend, it's kind of like a reading comprehension, being able to comprehend and gain context quickly in a code base is just, it's like a superpower, I think, for learning and getting up to date. And part of that is, if I would say the most important part of that is knowing what questions to ask and not being afraid to ask questions when you are new. And that's how you get that context. That's how you get the level of understanding to be able to build quickly and monitor AI. So I think, if anything, if you're a junior coming in, the first thing that you need to do is be able to ask the questions, ask lots of questions, and understand the code base. And that's the quickest path to independence. And yeah, that's the core, I would say.
That I think that it's interesting too because it's almost counterintuitive, like being a technical, coming into like a technical role, as like being a senior, you're like, ask a lot of questions, please. You know what I mean? Like we're not like, no stupid questions. Literally, just ask as many questions as, because like even as seniors, when you have something new, you're asking a lot of questions to make sure you have the right context, right? It's just like you
Mm-hmm.
said, knowing what questions to ask, knowing where to get knowledge from, who to lean on, and that goes to relationships and stuff. But like it's counterintuitive for a new person because it's like I want to like show that I know that like I belong here, right? Like that I can figure it out on my own, that I'm a self starter and stuff like that. And it's like that's, to me, was always a hard part of, or the most difficult part for juniors was finding that balance of like, I want to show that I'm a self starter, but I also want to show that I know how to use the resources around me, like in
Right.
an efficient way, you know?
Yeah. And admittedly, it's hard all the way to the top. I think everyone I mean, we're all human. We all struggle. We want to show that we know,
Yeah,
we're worth our salt. And it's hard to override and be like, you need to ask, or this is just going to stall out. Like, you need to ask. It's still hard to find that perfect balance.
exactly. When it's like, hey, at this point, we're really proud that you got to where you did, but just ask the question, you would have saved like yourself a day. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's it's interesting. I guess like that's something I like that because it's a good segue into like kind of another thing that I wanted to talk about. And you mentioned it kind of in the email, like psychological like wellness, essentially, right? Safety. And like there's a lot of, as a new engineer, you have to learn things that you never knew that you had to learn, right? Like I have to learn how to manage up. I have to learn how to manage my career. I have to learn how to like communicate and like gain visibility and do all of these things that have nothing to do with tech, essentially like software, right? But now we do have this weird place, and this is why like this is a good time for the conversation, I feel like, because we have this weird place where as seniors or mid-level engineers there's a lot of pressure right now to produce because of like AI and the way that business frames how they feel AI should affect production, right? Like for example, I've had a couple friends and like anecdotally like be like, hey, we got like they released like we released a new co-pilot for the company and now there's also a policy that we're supposed to like have double the amount of PRs by the end of the quarter kind of deal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like stuff
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
For me, it's like, how do we balance, or as like a mid-level or a senior level, it's like, how do you balance wanting to keep your job and like adjust with this, with these new production type things, but then also like have empathy to like still train and like still,
Hmm.
cause like I feel like what you just kind of talked about, you can kind of like, and we've seen it, you know, the pendulum swinging back and forth. And right now I feel like we are in this weird pendulum swing where eventually it's going to come back where we need a lot more soft skill, a lot more mentorship, a lot more like, hey, like the seniors need to be have time to one-on-one and talk to the juniors and do these things. And it's weird because I feel like AI should have enabled that more,
Hmm.
and it had
Yep.
kind of like the inverse effect like at the outbreak. So I'm curious, like, do you think that there's going to be, because like I feel like there has to be in order for us to foster new juniors to be able to do the work that we do, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
we like you can't like, it's such a weird like
Yeah.
how do we do that, you know what I mean? Like do you have thoughts on that?
I have so many thoughts. Yeah. I feel like the problem is that no one can come to a consensus. Tech leadership right now, I don't know if this would even be considered a hot take, but it feels like they can't make up their mind on what is important. Like, are we willing to make that investment into the future to foster junior engineers and make sure that the pipeline is healthy? Is that worth investing in, or are some tech leaders probably think that if we all in on AI, we won't need to consider that in the future? Even that's probably, I wouldn't be surprised if some thought that way. And my take is obviously that I think mentorship is always going to be important. Like even if AI becomes what we, our wildest dreams where it's fully independent, I think that's, in my opinion, a long ways away. And at that point, I think the concern is not just, you know, juniors. It's like, does anyone have a job at that point? Like yeah. So I think the more important thing is, I think for now, I think it is important to foster juniors, and the way we the way we do that, I think needs to change a little bit. I think psychological safety is still very important. I think those soft skills need to be important now too. Like I think we need to, like you mentioned, that there is a bit of an emphasis on just pure raw production and execution. I think we need to find a good balance. It's maybe as we kind of that pendulum swings, maybe it can start swinging less with less extremity,
Yeah,
kind of less polarity, where it starts swinging less, where we find a better balance as we have more time, which AI should enable us to have a little more time to think about these things. So
exactly.
we should be able to have maintained that high execution. I think that ideal case is still possible. I think the most successful mentors and leadership that I've witnessed are ones that can strike that balance. So I think it's a unicorn, but it definitely exists. And I think those are the most successful leaders, are the ones that can strike a balance between valuing soft skills, mentorship, psychological safety, and output. And it sounds like it's a zero sum game, but you can have both, right? I think, and sometimes I would even argue that psychological safety fosters more productivity because
Hmm.
teams are not worried and anxious all the time. And it's just, hey, if I need help, I can ask, and I won't feel like my job is on the line when I ask you to help out with something. Like, hey, I'm really struggling with this, or like, we're not going to meet this deadline if like, it just allows people to be more honest and frank, and you trust that people are doing their best and working their hardest.
It's interesting too, yeah, because like along that line, like you have that whole idea that if people are happier, they're more productive. You know what I mean? Like, because even now, one of the things that the industry is super rampant with, right, is just burnout and like managing
Mm-hmm.
burnout. And that's just before AI, that was like the big thing. Like, how do you manage your burnout? How do you even recognize that you're burned out? You know what I mean? Those types of things when you're talking to a junior, because it's like you're doing such a good job, but You need to pull back a little bit because you're gonna run yourself into the ground, you know? And it's hard because it's like now it's like having to balance that and but also balance like I gotta output more. And it's like so it's like it's I'm interested to know to see if it's going to be like a forcing if there's gonna be some kind of forcing function where businesses like have to like stop and listen to people and be like, okay, this is not healthy. You know what I mean? Like, okay, or somebody has to have some kind of thing that like what we can't have are these arbitrary leadership expectations where it's like, hey,
Mm,
here's a new tool, productivity goes up 25% this quarter. You know what I mean? Like it needs to be more exploratory. It needs to be more like we need to learn about how the tools augment production more than just like this will give us a 300 times. Like this turns our engineers into 10x engineers. Like that's not the
exactly.
case, right? Like
Yeah.
because I've seen folks vibe code for like hours and come up with nothing,
Hmm.
you know, and you're just like,
Yeah.
hey, I just needed you to adjust this function, and it's just like the Claude couldn't figure it out or GPT couldn't figure it out, and so it's interesting. It's interesting to see the disconnect between the way that business looks at things, how it gets sold, and then like how it gets implemented back in. You know what I mean? Like it's such an
Yeah.
interesting like feedback loop.
Yeah. For sure. Mm. That might be the challenge, actually. That might be what like seniors, like as juniors end up taking the execution route where like the output needs to go up, where they're just using it to execute and they become better at that. I think maybe senior and staff level engineers are going to end up taking more of that managing up, managing expectations and role. I mean, that already is somewhat the case, but I think that maybe there's kind of more of that pushing upwards of your scope is broader
Mhm.
and you're
It's
not.
kind of like more of a
Yeah,
leadership role, less of like an implementer role, IC role kind of deal, right?
exactly. I wonder if that
It's
will be the case.
it's funny. It's funny that you say that because like at LinkedIn for a while, uh, the staff plus track was almost kind of like that, where as a staff it felt like most of the time I was like in one-on-one meetings. I was like co-programming, pair programming with people, and I was like going through other folks' things, making sure that they're unblocked and they can work. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't responsible for individual bugs as much. It was just more the overarching health of my engineering team. Like, hey, are we producing correctly? And then that was kind of how it was before. And then there was like the layoffs, the recession stuff that happened, and then all of a sudden it kind of just shifted into like, okay, engineering managers and staff engineers, like you now have like new IC requirements, blah 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 blah. So like it was interesting because like even on the manager side, they changed it, and now I know that some companies already had that, but like now like at LinkedIn, engineering managers have to have a certain amount of people under them in each team, and then on top of that they also have to do IC work for the team.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then if you're a senior manager you have to have like a specific amount of teams under you, or you also have to IC for your teams.
yeah, yeah. That's
And I was just
always,
like,
man.
it's kind of crazy. It's to me it's the thing that gets me is like these folks that are in these positions are already performing extremely high, and they're already like at like this capacity mentally and physically, and like it just feels like we just tried to turn the knob up on them. You know what I mean? I think maybe it's just like a small blip in the longer term, of course, because everybody like everything's gonna it's like the stock market, right? Like it's gonna trend up, everything's gonna be fine in the long run. But I'm curious to see how what happens here and like how things change, because I feel like the industry is like there's been like a huge tree shaking, and it's really hard because now like you're not competing with just like you're competing with everybody from
Hmm.
junior to staff level for every single position that you apply for, because everybody's just looking for work.
Yeah, we're in the midst of a pretty crazy time. Yeah, it's wild out there right now, and we just don't know how it's actually going to shake out. So even advice, all the advice given right now, I think it's just taking your best guess at it.
How it's going to turn out.
Yeah,
Yeah. Let's take a step back now. And we've been talking a lot about like, your view for juniors and like how a mentorship and leadership and stuff like that. I'm kind of curious for you day to day as an engineer, as somebody who's in the industry. I may be a little bit different for you because you also have that entrepreneur kind of like mindset where it's like, like you started your own company, you that's something you probably want to do again. But what are the things that what are the things that you worry about to the point, like what keeps you up at night enough that you're like, am I positioned correctly? Am I like, should I look at this skill? And you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, yeah. What are those things for you right now?
I think the tough part is I don't even know if it's a skill. I think skills are always going to matter, but I think it is becoming harder and harder, I think, to differentiate yourself. Like you mentioned, you kind of alluded to it earlier in the conversation where it's not just leak code. I mean, leak code, you have a very, very quantitative metric as to do you pass this technical bar. I think it might be harder to make that differentiation, but I might be wrong. I think it's possible that if we do this right, that the people who will do the best on the job will get the job, because I think as things become more holistic, it's easier to test just pure execution, and interviews can go back to things that are more relevant to the actual job rather than just grinding out leak code. And that's the optimist's case. That's what I hope will happen. But I worry that that might not be the case. And I think we're not only competing with the threat of AI potentially taking our jobs, even when it's not necessarily qualified, because there's this push to reduce headcount. I mean, there's a lot of concerns. It's hard to pinpoint just one.
Sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
mean to put you on the spot like that. It was,
No, no, no. It's a great question. I don't. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the big one is AI. I think if I don't, it does feel like if I don't adopt AI and kind of ride this wave, I will fall behind, and that might very well be the case, right? I think, and it's not just from a pure output standpoint. It's learning to use your tools effectively, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? I think a good engineer, even now, needs to know how to use their tools well, and that's just part of it. But I think that's probably the biggest one where it's you wonder if you're falling behind because the pace. I feel like the pace is unprecedented as to how quickly things are changing. So yeah, every day is different. You have to keep up, and it's tough. And I can't imagine how tough it is for you know junior and entry level trying to come in. It feels like the skills that are needed to get a job are changing, day to day.
I'd be interested to see like what it's like having to put together curriculum like between semesters at this point. Like what is actually going to be important for your students, like, at the end of all of it. Yeah, you bring up a good point. That I was curious because that to me, it's interesting because it's like AI is like the double-edged sword for me right now, where it's like it gives me superpowers, I feel like, but at the same time, I know that I should be weary about it. You know what I mean? Like, how is it going to affect the industry? Like, it's so hard because, like, on one side, I get excited every single day with some of the stuff that I get to produce. But then I'll talk to a friend and he'll be like, dude, we're going to be out of jobs in 6 months. And I'm just like, how
Yeah,
do you stay excited?
yeah.
you know?
It's I get super excited when when I actually find a real use case when I'm actually integrating into a product. I get super excited, but
Mhm.
I think maybe I'm jaded. To me now, it's become like a tool. So it's like the day to day work is for me. It's a tool.
See, like, and I think like that's important. I don't want to. I don't want to downplay AI or the power of it or the effect that it's going to have like on tech or you know just the world in general, like society. But as a technologist and as an engineer, it is just it's another tool, it's another technology for us to build with, right? Like it's another paintbrush in the toolbox, so to speak. And I see it a lot. Like I like the parallel between AI and like the car industry, where it was like, we got rid of like we didn't get rid of factory workers necessarily because there's still a lot of jobs. The jobs just changed, right? Because the technology changed. And now the technology can do things that humans would not be able to do, but we still need humans to get it done at the end of the day. So I think like 100%. And like it's so hard because like be having like 10 years in industry area, or under your belt, it's like, plus you're like, I'll be fine. Like I think I'll be okay. I'll be okay. And I'm like, that's why like we started the podcast, was is like, but what about like the folks who don't have the context that we have, or the folks who didn't have to Google, you know what I mean, and Stack Overflow for 3 hours to get an
Man.
answer. Because like it's like I feel like those skills gave me the foundation that makes me strong in today's world with the tools. Because now that I understand what I'm doing and I understand how the tools work, it's like I can get the result I want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I I think that responsible use of AI looks like a more efficient Stack Overflow. I hope that that's the use case, and I hope that
Yeah.
that's what ends up happening. And I think the best users will be the ones that the ones that leverage the tool in the best and healthiest way for their own growth will be the ones that grow the most. And I mean, there's a lot of potential, but because of that, there's also a lot of potential for misuse. So you use it well, it's going to be amazing. You misuse it, you're probably going to stunt your own growth.
Exactly. It's kind of like that idea that goes back to like, hey, are you actually looking at what it's outputting? Like, because like let's say you don't know something. Like I've definitely I've had it where it's like I had to come up with a solution in C, and I've never written C before. So I wrote a solution in Java, and I was like, hey, I know Java. Can you rewrite this in C and then explain to me as a Java engineer how this works in C? And I was like, okay, now I understand. You know what I mean? Like it's like, okay. And it's like, but how many engineers will do that versus just rewrite this in C and then submit code? You know what I mean? Like kind of deal. Like, does it build? Does it build?
Yeah,
Like
it
that's
builds.
all that
Okay, we're good.
matters.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
So
for sure.
um but yeah, I guess like with that, like I'm curious because we're gonna come up on our 45 minutes, but I wanted to give you time. I wanted to just ask you just straight up, like, are there any thoughts or anything from the conversation or any ideas that you want to just like, any direct thoughts, direct advice, or anything you want to just like say, or like closing thoughts essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of if there's any advice, it's that we're all like, don't let too much of the doomerism get to you if you're in the industry. I think tech is always going to be a big industry. I think people, there's business use case for it, even for you. Just it's enabled people to start their own businesses. I've been able to be an entrepreneur because of tech, and I don't think that's going away. If anything, I think AI maybe has enabled a new generation of entrepreneurs to realize ideas that weren't possible before. And I hope that that's the way that AI goes. I think it's in the hands of tech leadership to make sure that that happens. Yeah. So to tech leadership, I hope that you can think about these things when you're running your teams, running your businesses, and for people entering the industry, you know, you need grit. And I think that if this is something that you're really passionate about, like kind of tough times will come and will go. Maybe this is unprecedented, but I think those that are left standing are the ones that use the opportunities available to them in the best way. And I think there are a lot of opportunities, like you mentioned, similar to the car industry, where there might be opportunities that might become available that weren't possible when we were learning how to code and becoming engineers. And I think it's like you said, it's a pendulum, and I think being ready for those opportunities will allow those to take advantage. Like luck is success is like a combination of luck and preparedness.
Exactly. It's like being ready for the moment kind of deal, right?
Yeah. At the same time, I don't want to sound callous. It's not to like downplay how tough it is right now for juniors. It's really tough, but yeah, if this is something you really want to do, then I would not lose hope.
I think that that's an interesting way to put it. Like, and it's a good sentiment to close with too, because over the last few years, especially through COVID, programming, software engineering, we basically got pegged as like the easy money industry, right? Like, and like it got flooded and everybody joined it. Everybody became a software engineer. Everybody's a dev, you know, all these boot camps, all this stuff. Colleges started their own boot camps, you know, like, and it's not to say that it's all bad. Some of it's good education. It's generated some good engineers, and it's given, like, you did really great at the Harvard incubation one. You know what I mean? And you said you did another, uh, you did a boot camp in LA. So like, that's not that they're bad things, but it sucks to see this, that there was like that saturation, and then now we're seeing the pendulum swing back, where it's like, okay, no, like this is a real, like, profession, real industry. There's a difficulty to it. There's a barrier of entry, but if you want it, it's worth it, and it's definitely a good life. Like, it's a good, fun industry, but it's not just a join it just because you can make money kind of industry anymore, I don't think.
Unfortunately, that kind of gold rush is not the case right now. It might happen again. Who knows?
But yeah.
Yeah, we might see vibe coding boot camps, but who knows?
I'm sure that there'll be like another swing back where all of a sudden like industry's catching a whole like crap ton of money and like grants and whatever, and we're just like, hire everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then we'll all be sitting here as doomers in the background, like, do you guys remember 2026, 2023?
Yeah.
But no, thank you. I guess, like, you know, if people want to sync up with you or reach out or anything like that, what is the best way for people to like meet up with you or reach out to you?
Yeah. I mean, admittedly, I'm not great with social media, but I really do think mentorship is important. If anybody wants to reach out, even on LinkedIn, just connect and, have conversations or ask about how to deal with certain things in industry, or need even, like, help getting referrals if it's needed. Just hit me up on LinkedIn. I think I'm always happy to chat.
Sweet.